It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George, and we are now on the other side of the spring game, which means that we are in the absolute worst part of the offseason. But that still gives us a week to kind of talk about the spring game, digest it, overreact enormously to very small data points. A lot of things to talk about, and in the lead up here when we were talking about it before we started recording, you came up with the good idea here. We're going to do the buy versus sell thing.
Yeah, I came up with the great idea that Around the Horn started doing 20
No.
years ago. They're getting canceled in a month. Who cares?
That's right. If this is anyone but Around the Horn, you're stealing my bit. No, yeah. So we want to do a little buy or sell that we came up with ourselves, and nobody else has
There's
ever done.
There's no trademark on that.
So let's talk about, first of all, a beautiful day in the shoe, upper 50s, sunny, just a really, really nice day for the spring game. There's been some really crappy ones in the past, many of which I've personally attended.
Sounds beautiful by Midwestern standards.
Yeah, that's all I want, and I've said repeatedly that I don't want it to get into the 60s until like June, so I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with how it turned out. Only 40-ish thousand people showed up.
Yikes!
That's not good. I think the rebranding was a failure, and then when they backpedaled at the last second, it didn't really do that much. So, look, props to Ohio State for putting on a proper spring game. I was actually a little surprised that they actually went all in on making it a game where they ran actual plays and had guys tackling for the most part. I mean, they did a little two-hand touch on passing plays, but they ran the ball a lot, and guys.
I did think it was funny that anytime the refs were like clarifying why something was going to work out, or there was a clock change or whatever that wasn't in line with like regular rules, they would say spring game rules. But then on the broadcast, they clarified that the rules are basically at Ryan Day's discretion.
Yeah,
so
right.
It was really just a Ryan Day rules football game.
Yeah, it's like somebody standing in the middle of like the cul-de-sac and yelling "car," right? When somebody pulls out of their driveway.
It was whose line is it anyway? Ohio State Football Edition, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter.
That's right. Perfect. So yeah, it was an enjoyable experience, but I do think that Ohio State shot themselves in the foot by rebranding the way that they did with the showcase and stuff. And then,
although if there's secretly a camp that wants to do away with the spring game entirely for revenue purposes or whatever, then I'm sure they're going to love citing the statistic of the worst attended spring game in years is like, oh, it's a dying trend and we need to do away with it.
But I don't understand.
They intentionally sabotage the spring game for their long-term agenda.
But that doesn't make sense to me, because 40,000 people at $10 a pop minimum, right? Like that's essentially what it was. So plus all the concessions and everything, like you're making money on this thing. I don't understand why you would lessen its impact. And I know a lot of coaches hate it because they're paranoid about the portal and people sniping their roster and all this crap. But like, I don't know, man. I didn't see anything there that shouldn't continue. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that they would be so upset about the possibility of somebody having 10 seconds of film on a freshman that they're like, oh, we can't do this anymore. Like, it doesn't make any sense. At the same time,
if I was desperate at receiver and I watched Ohio State spring game, I would certainly be calling, pretty much anybody in that room that's behind Brandon.
But everybody knows that. Like, hey. That's what pisses me off. Like, everybody, like, we didn't know that this 5-star receiver out of high school was good. Like, obviously, this isn't news. So that's the part that I don't really get.
I would like to introduce you to Mr. Julian Fleming. It's
well, no, that's an argument. That's an argument in the reverse. Then that's the problem for Penn State. They shouldn't have looked at the film. That actually helped Ohio State out, because then they could manage their roster better,
I guess. My point is, I understand where the coaches are coming from with it in terms of them. I think their reasons are at least logically, if not valid. You can understand where they're coming from.
Sure.
For athletic directors and decision makers that are more preoccupied with revenue, I agree that it seems like doing away with it is more of a missed opportunity than a way to eliminate
I just think it's
any kind
dumb.
of
I think it's a
cost.
slam dunk for goodwill, for the community, for fans. As I've said a million times, it's the only event that a family can reasonably attend for an actual, like, reasonable price and see their team.
To that point, you said last week that you probably weren't going to go, and you still ended up going with your family.
That was because I had a family obligation that changed. But
okay, fair enough.
so I was
Didn't
able to
realize
take
that.
my kid, with my wife, and it was great. We had an awesome time. It was a lot of fun. We got to see the band play and all that stuff. I mean, it's great. It's a great time. Now, I do want to talk about the overreaction stuff. So let's buy or sell on these quarterbacks. All right. Julian Sayin came out, and I will admit, I will cop to being like the chief Julian Sayin hater, based on very little evidence, just vibes, more or less. And then he came out and he had I wouldn't say probably, he had absolutely, I think, the best performance of the three, potential starting quarterbacks at Ohio State.
I would agree.
Despite being 5 feet tall. And I think that he, and I think he looked great. I mean, he had a live arm. So, I mean, let's start with Julian Sayin, buying or selling. Does this spring game performance, do you think it's indicative of the talent that he can bring during the regular season? Or is this just kind of like, okay, this guy's in his element, he's looking good, and that's maybe a one game
I mean, if I only have the option to buy or sell, I'm buying. But
okay.
I mean, if I've got the third secret option of just, like not investing my liquid assets and holding on to my cash, I'm holding on to my cash, because
Right.
I am the least encouraged at the moment by the quarterback situation than it coming out of the spring game. I was literally more encouraged by every single other position group I saw than quarterback, if only because, number one, nobody up to this point in camp has outright thoroughly impressed.
Sure.
I frankly don't think it should coming out of the season into spring ball. I was under the impression that Sayin should be running away with this. The fact that he hadn't outright separated himself from Lincoln Keenholz. See, I said it right.
I appreciate you
this
saying
time.
his name correctly. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess his performance in the spring game has elevated himself in your eyes.
absolutely
Correct
not.
pronunciation.
Absolutely not. But my point here is the fact that he hadn't separated himself from Keenholz, it is more of a testament to the fact that neither one of these guys are outright there to be commanding the offense yet, relative to the level that they need to be if they want to be a team that defends its national title. So I still think that Sayin is going to end up and should be the guy.
Yeah.
But he's still got a long way to go. He was, frankly, he looked oblivious in terms of backside pressure in this game, giving up a lot of different sacks. And granted, it's tough to get a sense with this spring game format, just because I feel like they would get more in a way out of doing like a 7-on-7 against another like school. That way there's at least a little bit of a competitive edge to it, and you're not worried about like live contact injuries or whatever, than just doing an inter squad scrimmage where you're still not really supposed to touch the quarterback. Every time they would run a zone read in this game and the quarterback was keeping the ball, I was just like, what is the purpose of this?
Yeah, it's really funny you say that, because I did the exact same thought. It's like, first of all, no one thinks their quarterback's going to keep it. Second of all, even if they did, as soon as the guy gets touched, the play is over. So there's no point in even bothering doing that. Like, it doesn't make sense that they would.
You don't want to hurt your own guys either. So
Yeah.
it's like when they would tell you in practice, like, all right, we want to go 75% or 80% for this walkthrough. It's like, oh yeah, let me calibrate how hard I'm gonna slam into this person. Like it's something I've just never liked about doing inter squad scrimmages.
Yeah,
so I hesitate to extrapolate any greater like a long-term outlook for the quarterback position based on what happened in this game. And it's the same story as last year too, where I thought Tavian St. Clair had a similar performance in this spring game to the one that Julian Sayin had last year.
Right.
And Will Howard, who obviously ended up being one of, if not Ohio State's most important player down the stretch of the season, didn't necessarily impress in the spring game himself. I would argue didn't have as good of a showing in last year's spring game as Sayin had in this one even.
No, I mean, Howard didn't even look. I mean, people were doubting Howard and thought he looked bad in practices in fall camp last season. Like that, I mean, and that's part of what I think all of this comes down to, which is it's really hard to project, into the future based on what we're seeing, at this point in the year. Now, I do think it's interesting that Lincoln Keenholz was as close to Julian Sayin in general throughout the spring. That point that you made, I think is really well taken because you did expect this guy to kind of separate himself a little bit. Lincoln Keenholz was not a marquee recruit, right? This is not a guy that people expected to come in and be a starter at some point.
I mean, he was a 4-star guy, and Day's done well with 4-star guys.
Sure, yeah,
like
but
CJ
he was never.
Stroud
I mean,
before.
he wasn't like the heir apparent at any point in time. This is a guy who I think they expected to be a backup for pretty much his entire career, and maybe a guy who can come in and do some things if needed, but not like not a guy who's leading Ohio State to a championship. And the fact that Keenholz has been so close to Julian Sayin throughout the spring in terms of like reps with the ones and all that stuff, I think that says something. I think that says that this is still essentially a competition. Now, I thought Keenholz played fairly well in the spring game. I think he got better as he threw more passes and got more comfortable.
He didn't impress me the way that Sayin had. I don't think he had as many moments.
I would agree. I don't think he has as live an arm as Julian Sayin does. I don't think it's quite as crisp when it comes out of his hand. I mean, Julian Sayin, you can tell. I mean, his release is extremely fast, and he's really like the mechanics are really just down with that kid. But Lincoln Keenholz is, he's an athletic specimen. He's 6'3", whatever. I mean, the guy is that prototype that you want at that position. I just don't know, how fast he can process things, and that's really, kind of what it comes down to both him and Julian Sayin. Because Julian Sayin, like you said, the backside pressure got to him a lot. He didn't bail when he needed to. Even his throwaways were like, that's why. I mean, why are you putting that there? That kind of stuff. So. And this is all to be expected because none of these guys have been starters. They have almost no real functional experience. And that's something that you're going to see at this point. So I think that's just, here it's kind of a TBD in terms of, how their effectiveness is going to be in the fall. So I don't know.
Now, by that same token, I like my greatest hope for, and it didn't matter to me if, Howard or Sayin ended up the starter last year, even though I, said from the beginning, I thought I would rather it be Sayin if both guys aren't impressing just because I think Sayin has the higher ceiling.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I just wanted to see the guy that was going to be able to effectively distribute the ball through the offense, given all of the proven weapons that they had at their disposal.
Right.
And I have to say that even though I was skeptical based on the relative inexperience at a lot of the skill positions in this offense beyond Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate to a lesser extent, I came away after finally seeing a lot of these guys in a little bit of live action very impressed and encouraged by what they're going to have at their disposal. CJ Donaldson reminds me a lot of Judkins already in terms of the way that he moves and the physicality he has. And I think that it's going to be harder for them to replicate what Travion Henderson brought without him there than I think it is what Judkins brought. Right. I think that Donaldson is going to fit into the Judkins role right away very quickly. I don't know who their big primary home run hitter or pass catcher is going to be. I know that I think it was Sam Williams-Dixon had some good pass catching plays in this spring game, so they might have to look to him. But at this point, he's more competing, I think, for the RB3 job behind Peoples and Donaldson than in a firmly entrenched role. But Bo Jackson looked pretty impressive on his handful of touches too. So even if they end up suffering some health setbacks in this running back room, I am buying the Ohio State running backs, particularly now that they're running behind an offensive line that we expect to do very well. Whereas going into last season, we said that is the position group with the most question marks around it. I feel very comfortable believing that these guys under the tutelage of Carlos Loughlin are going to serve very well. I don't know if we're going to get a pair of 1,000-yard running backs again. I don't think that that's necessarily realistic, but I was encouraged at least by what I saw in the spring game.
So
And
you'd buy the rushing back room then.
yeah,
That's okay. I would agree. I think that based on what I saw, especially with the experience that you get from CJ Donaldson, and honestly, the experience from a lot of these guys, like, it's not that they have a ton of carries, but these aren't dudes who are super new to the game of college football. You do have a decent amount of like experience within the system, at that position group. Yeah, I'm in on them too. And I liked what I saw from CJ Donaldson. He definitely looked a little bit more slimmed down from where he was at West Virginia. And I think that's what they expect of him. They want him to be a little more active in things like the passing game and whatnot. Sam Williams-Dixon looked really good. And now part of that, and this is the other element that we can talk about, they ran a lot of interior rushing plays. And one of the things that people, I think, they were heartened by the way that the rushing game was going, but also going, what the hell's going on at defensive tackle? And I think that's where maybe my first sell would come in, because I would agree with the consensus on this, which is that is an area of concern on the defensive line. And, granted, you're losing a lot on defensive line, period. But I think they really have to figure out a way to shore up that particular part of the defense. I think the linebackers will be good. I think the defensive backs are going to be great. I think they'll be fine at defensive end, but in the Big Ten, you got to have some big ass DTs who can occupy space, and didn't seem like they got a lot of anything, during the spring game.
Yeah, if you don't have effective gap fillers along the line, then it doesn't matter. I mean, we'll talk about the Big Ten commentary team relative to this game
okay
in a sec, because I know you were at the game and then watched the highlights when you
got
back.
Yeah.
So you
I didn't really get the full
to
effect, I guess.
But I have some thoughts on that group relative to the glamorizing they did of Ohio State. But one of the many things they said that I thought was a little bit, if not outrageous, just a little bit like a bit out in front or on the nose, was that they were openly asking if Ohio State has the most athletic linebacking core in the entire country. Now, whether or not you subscribe to that theory,
right?
The fact is, if you don't have effective gap fillers on the defensive line, it does not matter how athletic your linebackers are.
Correct.
Their job is to come in and fill where the gaps are left open, the ones that aren't filled by the ones that are occupied by the space eaters on the defensive line.
Right.
That is how you effectively shut down another team's running game. If the other team is not preoccupied with what is directly lined up in front of them, they are then free to send blockers to the second level to block those athletic guys.
Right.
And then your running back is able to fall forward for at least 3 yards on pretty much every play. And I am worried about them getting chunked to death by teams with effective rushing games early on, if not later in the season. And I wonder how they're going to be able to rectify that against a team like Texas.
Well, and think about how many times Ohio State had critical goal line or red zone stands, right? And how
that was a hallmark of their defense last year.
And how unbelievably important it was that they could not be run on up the middle, right? The reason why Texas did that stupid little toss play that lost them 5 yards in the Cotton Bowl, right? And just, sacrificed themselves to Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom is because they were so terrified of just running 4 times up the gut and getting nothing, right? Because they had seen that exact same thing happen against Penn State when Ohio State played Penn State earlier in the year.
Yep.
And that's exactly how it played out.
Yep.
Texas isn't concerned about that. They probably score, right? Like they probably just run it 4 times and that's it. Instead, they get in their own heads. They're worried about how effective Ohio State is at stopping those types of plays, and they do something stupid like that. That's how important that stuff is. And those two positions, those defensive tackles, really mean everything. And Ohio State was extremely lucky to have the guys, last season that they had, because it just helped everything else work. When we talk about how, suddenly effective guys like Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer were, well, that's in part because the defensive tackles freed them up to, kind of do their thing a little bit. So yeah, no, I'm with you. I think it's really interesting how that's going to play out. And honestly, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if they were active in the portal trying to find another dude at that position. And one thing that you brought up, and this is kind of connected to another position, but the receiving core, right? And I want you to reiterate the question that you had when we, before we started recording, vis-a-vis Mylan Graham and Brandon Ennis.
Yeah,
I think that's really interesting.
I think that there's no question that the most impressive player in the spring game was Mylan Graham.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any dispute from anybody that watched this game,
right,
in person, on TV, or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm wondering here is, like, it is well established over several years at this point under Ryan Day that the receiver room is not only elite, but deep. And it is important for you to keep your alpha in place. But when you've got that primary threat already established, it becomes easier for you to raise up the same players at the same position that are further down the depth chart, because the attention is already being focused on the primary threat that has established themselves. So Jeremiah Smith isn't going anywhere.
No.
Carnell Tate, the rumor was this guy was being offered like $1 million to jump in the portal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't know what he was ultimately allocated from Ohio State in order to stick around. We don't know if, maybe he gave them a discount because he likes being here. We don't know what the number is. But he had to have gotten something based on the numbers that were being thrown out there. What I wonder is, would it have been more effective for this team to perhaps let Tate go in order to keep those resources and use them in the portal to shore up other areas of weakness, given they know how rock solid they are at receiver?
Right.
And then that allows you to move Brandon Ennis into the wide receiver 2 role and let him develop. And then you've got a guy like Mylan Graham that you can move into the wide receiver 3 role, and you still have incoming players like Quincy Porter that you can rely on if one of those guys were to get injured or wouldn't be available for some reason.
Sure.
By that same token, Mylan Graham was impressive enough that, frankly, I feel like I don't feel like Brandon Ennis wowed me enough last season in the limited opportunities that he got that I necessarily need to see him in the wide receiver 3 role this season, if by no other right than seniority.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see Mylan Graham. I feel like needs to be on that football field in a greater capacity than the wide receiver 4 role would allow. So how do you feel about what I've put out there relative to the Carnell Tate side of this? And
no,
NIL?
yeah, I mean,
and then do you want to see Mylan Graham also on the field in a more available capacity than presumably what he would be at the moment?
I do think that part of this, consideration, first of all, I understand what you're saying. And I don't think, especially like, in the era of NIL and the fact that people are going to be getting offered money and flirting with the portal and all that stuff, like it's, part of me wants to go, like, well, where's the loyalty and things like that? That doesn't really exist. And when guys are getting
you're 5 years
right
late.
Yeah.
Party.
And when guys are making literally millions of dollars, like sometimes those are the decisions that you have to make, particularly when you have such a loaded, wide receiver room like Ohio State has.
You have to think about roster building scenarios like this now.
Yeah,
it's just the reality of when you're trying to be a top flight program, like
right. And
Ohio
nothing
State
against
is.
Carnell Tate, who I think is excellent. I think he's really good. But you've got Rogers, you've got Graham, you've got, like all these other dudes, who can step in and probably fill that role.
For the record, he's one of the best, most inspiring stories on the team. I don't want to. It's not like I want to see the guy.
Of course
leave.
not.
Just saying, this is a business now. At the end of the day, so.
But you're right.
If you're trying to balance where you're allocating your assets,
yeah, and you just brought in Max Clare. Like there are a lot of guys on the team who can catch the ball, and if you're being super callous about it, if you are just saying like, hey man, we gotta field the best team possible, then maybe those are the kind of things that you got to start to think about. Now, with that said, do all these other guys do the things that you need to do? Are they good at blocking, right? Like, are they good route runners? Do they understand the offense, in the same way that Carnell Tate? I don't know. And those are all things that have to play into that kind of consideration. Yeah. But I do think that ultimately you have to ask yourself those questions, especially in the spring when you're talking about like roster building and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, like, look, if Ohio State feels that they can fill that role, that like Carnell Tate or Brandon Ennis might have, okay, with their other guys, and those other dudes could go out into the portal and make a couple million, then I mean, honestly, more power to them. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for Ohio State to be like, guys, we love you, but like, go get that bag, right? Like, we're not going to give you.
They already went through it with Jamison Williams once.
Yeah. And there weren't any hard feelings there. I don't think Ohio State was like, oh, we hate
not from Ohio State side.
Well, no. No. But you know what I'm saying? Like, my point is that I don't think Ohio State is like going, oh man, we hate these guys for going out there and getting the cash that we may not necessarily want to allocate to them. It's a business ultimately. And it has been for a long time. I think now it's just, we have to start to ask these questions. And I think that's a good point on your part, honestly. The other thing that I was kind of thinking about, so you were talking, so I did see it live.
Well, hold on. So do you want to see Mylan Graham at wide receiver 3 is the other part of that equation?
I'll buy that. Brandon Ennis, what we say, he had like 14 catches all last season. Yeah, if it's Smith and then Tate and then question mark, then yeah. Based on this performance, I'll buy that. I'll buy Mylan Graham at the 3. I'm cool with that.
Ennis can still return punts.
Yeah. I mean,
instead of the regular rotation of punt returners we had last year, he could just focus on that.
There you go. All right, 2 more things. I do want to, I did see it live, right? So I went back and I saw some of the highlights, but I didn't get the full broadcast experience that you did. So apparently you are all completely like hard sell
on
the commentator,
on the hype beast mentality around this team. Oh my God. Right. It was so ridiculous. Like it was like the anti ESPN experience where ESPN is always poo-pooing. We're going to talk about Nico Iamaleava later. But in that first CFP game, they were literally talking him up more than they were Will Howard.
Yes, which is really funny.
It was, and then that's not even getting into the whole Kirk Herbstreit versus the lunatic fringe thing that happened towards the end of the game. Mm-hmm. You watch ESPN, and they're always talking down Ohio State.
Right.
In this case, this was the opposite experience. I mentioned earlier how they were talking about Ohio State having the most athletic linebacking core in the country. At one point, they were wondering if both Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs were going to finish as Heisman Trophy candidates.
Well, I mean, maybe this will be the first split Heisman in the history.
That's such a ridiculous question to pose. Like
it is, yeah.
Especially in spring.
Yeah. That smacks of we ran out of ideas to talk about stuff and we're just gonna throw whatever at the fridge and see what sticks. That's pretty bad. I think you kind of fall into that trap, especially. I mean, there are a couple of things working against you when you're watching this live. First of all, they are defending national champions, so people are going to just talk up every single player like they're going to win a national championship.
Well, that's a big selling point for Big Ten Network,
exactly.
Too,
Exactly.
Defending champs.
Exactly. This is the best team in the country and will remain so until proven otherwise. And then also, it's a spring game. So like, what the hell are you going to talk about? So they're just going to like pull random crap out of their ass and be like, yeah. This is the best player you've ever seen.
Well, and then later on, and we didn't talk about him as much relative to Keenholz and Sand, but Tavian St. Clair, like, that we speculated early in spring ball that it was going to be more of a Sand versus St. Clair ordeal than Sand versus Keenholz.
Yeah, right.
That clearly has not proven to be the case, not only based on comments that Ryan Day has made himself towards the end of spring ball, but what was evidenced in the actual spring game. He threw 2 very, very bad interceptions.
They're terrible
in that game.
I've been talking that dude up for a couple months now, and he did not justify that.
It's like I said earlier, his performance in this game reminded me of Sand's performance in last year's spring game, where he's just, he's a freshman, he's raw, he's got a long way to go in terms of ironing out the kinks in his game. Like, it's just the way that it goes. When you're a young, inexperienced player, you're going to be more prone to making ill-advised
He should still be in high school right now. I mean, I'm not taking that as some kind of prognostication on how he's going to play as a college football player.
But the Big Ten commentary team, like a quarter after those mistakes have been made, was so like, how about the moxie from Tavian St. Clair to rally back in this game and make a series of impressive plays after those 2 early mistakes. He threw 2 bad picks in an inter squad scrimmage, and now you're saying he's this lights out player in a spring game? Like, what? You don't need to glamorize.
Here's the future,
like
folks. Soak it in. Well, my point.
Somebody's going to flip out at it. They were irate last week that we didn't know what state Chris Henry was in. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't obsess over the mundane details of teenagers the way that you freaks do. I have better things to do. I'm sorry.
The offensive line recruit that I was trying to think of, somebody did mention this in the YouTube comments, and I'm very appreciative to them for doing it. Chantrell Henderson was the guy's name,
I saw that too.
which I very much appreciate. Because
and I guess he did end up in Miami. He did go to Florida after Urban sold him on seeing him in a dream.
That's right. He did end up in Miami, and I did basically nothing. I mean, he wasn't a very good player for him. So, it just goes to show, don't take your shoes off to try to placate a team. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, other thing I want to talk about, the ring presentation. That was fun. They got 3 rings, actually. They got one for
that seems excessive.
It does. It really does.
And I love rings like that. I know hate. I know you are.
I think they're the dumbest freaking thing. Like,
if I won one of those, I would wear it all the time. Those are great.
Come up with any reason to like touch your face and just be like,
oh yeah, 100%.
To show it off. I just think they're ridiculous and obnoxious. I do think it's weird that they got 3. I think 1 would probably suffice. I don't think it's cool. My point is that I think there are cooler awards that you could give somebody, right? Like, there are cooler things that you could give as a signifier that they did something than a ring. That's all I'm saying.
To quote Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, that's you because you never won.
That's true. I do like the fact that they've got it to where it like opens, like it's like a clasp. So they're even admitting that, and then it had like little pieces of the confetti from the national championship game. And
that part's cool. I haven't heard that done before.
Yeah, so
it was. I can give them props for
there's
that.
a lot going on there, but
I think 3 is excessive.
I think 3 is excessive. I think it should be like, I think what they should evolve.
Crowd, some would say.
What it should evolve into is like where they do those like, those whistle rings where you go like, like you can blow into it and then it makes.
Oh, that would maximize the obnoxious.
That's what I'm saying. They should just go all out and make it an actual musical instrument that they can play the fight song or the alma mater on, and then it would be super obnoxious. No, I think there's
and then they can
stuff. Have
the whole national championship team do their own rendition of Script Ohio.
Yeah, right. On their that's right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think there's cooler stuff. I think you could have like a sweet chain that you give somebody. I don't know.
If they gave out national championship chains,
I think that would rule.
What is this, Miami? Like,
yes.
Come on, no.
What's the ring?
No.
I think a chain would be cool.
They would get killed for
I don't care. I think that'd be cooler. Get a sweet piece on the end of a chain. I think it'd be sick.
The chains are so for the purpose of obnoxiousness. A chain would be so much more into that than a ring is much more.
I want to see like a Flava Flav sized chain with a piece that they like hold up, or a plate.
Want these players to have any glory.
Yeah. Maybe a plate like they do at Wimbledon. That'd be cool. Like something like that. I don't know. I just want something more interesting than a freaking oversized novelty ring that looks like, that weighs 50 pounds. I don't know. It's very silly.
If you're a football player that was championship caliber, your hands are presumably strong enough to bear that.
That's true.
That weight. So
my tiny porcelain hands don't understand what it's like to be able to bear the brunt.
That's right.
Of the weight of a national championship. Right.
That's right.
So that's the spring game. It was a lot of fun to attend, and I really hope that next time they put a little more effort into making it an event and not shying away from it, because it really is a lot of fun. It means a lot to a lot of people. And I want to, selfishly, I want to be able to keep taking my kid and my wife to a game that we don't get to do very often because it's so prohibitively expensive. So anyway, so that was spring game. Let's do Ask Us Anything. Before we do that, I want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the dry goods store, 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. drygoods.11warriors.com. We got 2 new shirts. We got the Lone Star Heist, which is a diagrammed play of Jack Sawyer's Scoop and Score. So that's pretty sweet. And then we've also got a Rose Bowl shirt with X's over the eyes of a duck who's dead. The duck has died because Ohio State was up 34-0 in the second quarter, and that was pretty sick. So,
not to be confused with the Afro Duck.
Yes, correct. Shirt. Yes, that's right. Which I don't know if we still have in stock, but we should. All right, so let's do
only
Ask Us
one
Anything.
Dead duck shirt at a time at the dry goods store.
Right. That's right. So let's do Ask Us Anything. You can send us any question to dubcast@11warriors.com. This is from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know, where do you see yourself in 30 years, George?
Oh, God.
That's a long time. I'll be 70.
Don't ask me that.
I'll be 70 years old. I don't know. Ginter men don't, honestly, we're not super long lived for various dietary reasons for the most part. I hope my dad and myself, we beat the rap, but, I don't know. I want to be active. I guess the only thing that I would say is that I still want to be active. I want to be riding my bike. I want to be out in nature and, enjoying that part of life. I think when I'm 70 years old, that's the biggest thing that I want for myself. In addition to obviously being surrounded by friends and family and all that kind of stuff.
I'm going to be in Vegas, posted up in the sports book every weekend.
There you
with
go.
All the other crispy critters watching UFC fight nights. And
just like your hero, Pete Rose.
Yeah, and then flying back every Saturday for Ohio State football games.
Hell yeah.
Still writing for 11 Warriors.
That's right. Which 11 Warriors has evolved into a conglomerate, and it's the only sports outlet in the entirety of.
Well, we're still going to be doing the Dubcast.
That's right. We'll be on episode 5,000. It'll be good. Yeah, we'll be doing multiple episodes a day. This next one is from Joshua F., who asks, on average, who do you listen to more, the devil on one shoulder or the angel on the other? I listened to the droopy dog. I listened to the droopy dog, sitting on my head, who's just like, I don't think you should do that. I listen to the voice in my head that is just like the namby-pamby, just maybe you shouldn't do that. But I don't necessarily go for good or bad. I always take the most neutral, conflict avoidance option possible. I think that's pretty much my bag. I'll occasionally be evil though. That's fine,
I tend to keep a good balance. I'm kind of, in some ways, for some of my life, I've not been good with impulse control. So I'll either be totally giving into my demons, or I've completely blocked them out. And I go through waves of like either being all in or all out
Fair
in
enough.
terms of doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing to my own detriment. So,
yeah.
but always only to my own detriment, never to the detriment of other people.
Oh, well, that's
when
good.
it comes
That's
to
good.
dealing with other people, I'm always taking the good route.
That's
usually.
a good way to approach life, I think. It's
No,
funny
it
because,
isn't.
well, I'm generally a pretty goody two shoes kind of guy. However, there are certain things that I am very like certain rules, certain regulations that I am entirely willing to ignore or break when it comes to just like general life things. Like not necessarily, evil stuff or law breaking stuff that would put me in jail, but like faux pas where I'm just like, I don't care about this at all. And I hope you get mad. Uh, and it's funny because most people who know me are like, oh, he's a pretty affable guy, pretty easygoing, easy to get along with. But then there are certain things where I'm like, no, I'm going to be a huge asshole about this because that's just one of the things that I'm wired to be. Or I'm perfectly willing to like, take this if I need it, that kind of stuff. So it's weird how morally flexible we become when there are very specific things that we just don't give a crap about. So I don't know. It's interesting to see where that line is for everybody because I think everybody has a line. All right, this last one here. This is from Bryant, who wants to know: describe the NCAA in one word.
Why don't you go first?
Pathetic, I think would probably be the word I go for. Really, just kind of sad. But I think pathetic kind of sells it more because I mean it really is like somebody with a very small measure of authority trying to pretend that it means a lot more than it. They're really the Dwight Schrutes, right, of college sports. Like somebody who really, really wants to believe that they have a lot of power, but don't actually have any power whatsoever. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I don't necessarily want to call it a money laundering operation, but that's really what they're best at. So, I mean, I don't know.
Well, for all the NCAA representatives that are listening to this, I will say you are very righteous. that is my way I would describe you, because you're going to use that great righteousness that you carry yourselves with.
Oh, okay.
To
I know where
bring the hammer down
right, of course.
on
Yes.
the Michigan football program
right.
for their unjust deeds.
That's right.
Across so many years.
You will sack up for once in your existence.
That's right.
Surprisingly
very, very
resilient.
righteous bunch. And if they were to not do so, then they would certainly not be righteous, were they? So
right.
That's the
we got
the catch-22.
Mr.
They have no
Crimes.
choice now but to punish Michigan.
Mr. Computer Crimes has allegedly done some pretty heinous stuff. So if that is proven true, then, it's just another reason for them to bring down the hammer.
Listen, we say innocent until proven guilty, but it's already been reported that they found like thousands.
It seems fairly likely. I mean, we can't obviously say
they've already reported the evidence that they have on the guy. It seems pretty open and shut.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, obviously we, until the actual verdict comes down, nobody can say innocent or guilty. But on the other hand, damn, that's a lot of evidence against this guy. So
I feel like the Harbaughs had to have known something, right? Because he was doing this presumably back when he was on the Ravens, and then John handed this guy off to his brother Jim. And
it's not like this guy was some low-level staffer. You know what I mean? Like, that's really what gets me. He was the co-offensive coordinator. Yeah. This is a guy that you're around a lot.
No, but but my point is more like Jim had to have gone to John and be like, oh, so, this
good
guy.
Dude?
Yeah, what kind of character is this guy? He's a little weird, but,
Everybody
made a couple comments about my daughter I'm not totally comfortable with.
Right.
But, it's
But I didn't think about it past that, and it's fine. Yeah, it's messed up. And
caught him looking at some weird stuff on his phone once, but I'm sure, it was just on the internet, and it was nothing he actually had saved locally or in quantities of over thousands of images or anything.
Yeah, he keeps asking for something called tetrabytes of data. I don't know what that means, but yeah, it's really weird, and I don't understand. I don't know how somebody can do all that stuff from work. That's the other thing. He was doing it on work computers. You know what I mean? Like he was like accessing this stuff at these institutions. It's not like it was something he was doing in his spare time at home and that's how they figured it out. Like it was at work. So I don't know. Okay, so that's Ask Us Anything for this week. Thank you for sending those questions in. We'll keep answering them. A couple of the things we want to get to before we get out of here. Mark Pantoni, all right, general manager, I guess is how we're going to call him now. He signs a new contract. Hell yeah. Mark Pantoni, for those of you guys who don't know, is probably, I mean, he was with Urban Meyer for a long time at Florida, and his job essentially is to like identify recruits, figure out who to go after, how to allocate money to that effect, all that kind of stuff. And Mark Pantoni is incredibly good at his job. One of the more underrated administrators, I think, in college football in general, and has been doing his thing for a long time and is really, really, really good at what he does. So the fact that they locked him down is awesome, and I'm really excited that that he's sticking with Ohio State because that's important. That's really important.
The basketball team could use someone like that.
Oh my God, yes they could. Yes they could. They absolutely could. God, oh my God. And by the way, but that tells you exactly the difference between a team that has a guy like him and a team that does not have a guy like him, because it's all about talent identification. And Mark Pantoni is like the best in the business at it. And apparently nobody's doing it on the men's basketball team. And you can see the difference. You can see the difference and how that plays out with guys that they get in the portal, with recruit targets, all that kind of stuff. It's night and day. Men's tennis, congratulations to them. Continue to dominate the Big Ten. What, they're 19th in a row is what I saw, the regular season Big Ten title. Is that like, I couldn't even believe that when I saw that 19th consecutive Big Ten regular season title. This isn't like they're playing in a conference where nobody else plays tennis. I mean, I understand it's not.
Yeah,
as
USC's
big.
Technically in the Big Ten now, and they've got quite a tennis program of their own out there.
So Ohio State's men's tennis continues to kick ass, and more power to those guys. I think it's kind of unbelievable that they have played as well as they've played. They're 22-2 on the regular season and 11-0 in the Big Ten. So, Jesus, all right, good for them. Another thing that I want to talk about real quick, and I just thought this was really funny before we get out of here. I do want to get into the Nico Iamaleava drama at Tennessee.
More like Nico Iamaleava.
Yeah, he's leaving. Yeah. The rumors. So first of all, he got a butt ton of money to go to Knoxville, right? And I think it was
got a whole McDonald's bag of money to go to Tennessee.
That's right. And I think it was like $2 million a year ish, is what was not reported. Yeah, he was getting a lot of money. He comes into Ohio State in the first round of the playoff. I thought he played fairly well. He was, probably the best player on his team against Ohio State. And
that's not saying much.
It's not saying much, but I think he played well given the circumstances. The rest of his team was just getting, run out of town on a rail.
He seemed like the only player not preoccupied with how cold it was.
Yeah, I mean, he was trying his best. Now, with that said, over the course of the entire season, he had a very up and down season. He would have games where he looked incredible and was going to take the next step, and then he would take a couple steps back in the next game. Anyway, the other rumor that came out is that the dude now wanted $4 million and it was like, all right, Tennessee, put up or shut up, or I'm hitting the bricks.
$4 million.
Yes. And, Tennessee was like, okay, buddy, hit the bricks because we are not paying you that. Josh Heupel came out and said nobody's bigger than the team, including myself. They told him to hit the skids. And the funny thing about it is like, that's generally not a power move you want to make unless you have a landing spot already lined up, which he does not have.
No.
So there are various teams, including like Texas Tech and a lot of other potential landing spots, who have come out and said straight up, like, no, we're good. We're good, man. Have fun. He can't go to another SEC team and start right away because of SEC rules. So he would have to sit out for another season. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to this guy, but it really seems to me like he just screwed himself out of $2 million because there's no way in hell anybody's going to pay him $4 million. And he's probably going to have to take a step back. Like that's what it looks like at this point.
I mean, when you frame it right, that it reminds me kind of what happened with Matthew Sluka at UNLV.
Yeah, that's right. During the
Yeah,
season.
right. In terms of him kind of getting out ahead of his skis in terms of his own NIL valuation without really having a landing spot in mind. Typically, when you're going to leverage your current place for more money, you've already got another place that's offering
Right.
you a
Right.
similar
Right.
amount of money for what you're now asking for. You're not just bluffing for the sake of inflating your own asking price.
Yeah. I can't
Because
imagine
the
like
flip
going.
side of that is you get kicked out, or not. I guess he wasn't kicked out, but the
You
flip
can still
side
go
is
to
the other
school.
team
You can
just
go to
says,
Tennessee.
you go right ahead and walk, and
Right.
best of luck to you. I have no problem at all with what Tennessee did. I think, frankly, I don't know if they were one of the team. Like, there were only a handful of teams that were purported to have spent $20 million on their roster last season or more than that. So
Yeah.
if you were to assume that Tennessee was near the ballpark of that, you're talking about allocating 20% of your salary to not even one position group, but one player on your team.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Assuming that you're even, putting that much money into it. Which, by the way, another thing that I did when this all came out is I went on Tennessee like volunteer message boards and stuff. And initially there were a lot of guys who were like trying to back, Nico and saying, "Hey man, this guy deserves the money and whatnot. Look at how Ohio State spent." And the funniest thing about it is that every time Ohio State, the amount of money that they spent on their roster last season is mentioned, it gets a little higher. So, there was speculation. The only real, even ballpark figure that we have, and it's really based on nothing, is about $20 million. It could be more than that. It probably is more than that. But it started with 20 million. And if you watch these guys talk about it, they're like, "Yeah, man, I can't believe Ohio State $30 million.
Yeah.
Tennessee doesn't have $50 million like Ohio State." And so it just keeps getting more and more inflated. And it's funny because there is a finite point to which these colleges are going to go like, why are we going to pay a dude out of high school $8 million when we don't even know if he's going to be that good, right? Like at a certain point, they're going to have to wise up. And Nico Iamaleava was like, "Well, I took my team to the playoffs. We got this." But it's like, well, no, you don't, because you weren't that great. You were fine. You were good even, but like not great. Not $4 million.
Taking your team to the playoffs is not as impressive as it was for the last 10 years
Exactly.
of the playoffs existence.
Exactly.
I mean, the playoff field literally just tripled.
Right.
And SEC teams and Big Ten teams have a birthright of sorts into going into the playoffs. So it's like you don't even have to be top flight in your conference in order to get in there. Tennessee didn't play in the SEC championship game.
Right. And also you had the SEC Offensive Player of the Year on your team, and it wasn't you, it was the running back.
That's another good. Yeah, I mean that I hadn't even considered that. Like, if you're not even the best player in your offense to be asking for that kind of money is on its face absurd.
Yeah. So somebody was giving
maybe he saw how easily David Sanders threw his weight around without having played it down at Tennessee.
I guess.
And said, oh, maybe I can leverage them for just as much benefit.
So stupid. And I understand that at some of these places you're going to get Bryce Underwood money, and they're like, all right, well, some billionaire is going to come in waving a second cap.
And that is another thing I hadn't considered, is that how much has that news kind of reset the market?
Right. It might have, but I think the difference is we talk about this in almost NFL type terms. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, the new contract means that this is what the new standard is. But the difference is that in the NFL, guys who get those kind of contracts are typically getting them based on past performance, right? Whereas, you look at Bryce Underwood. Bryce Underwood might be terrible in college. We have no idea, right? This is all speculative. It's all like, okay, well, we're going to dump this cash in part because we think you're really good, but also because we don't want anybody else to get this asset. And so it's so speculative that when it blows up in someone's face, I think it will reset, right? The amount of money that people are willing to spend. It's not like Bryce Underwood it's not a transfer. If it were a guy like Cam Ward, I do think that changes the game a little bit. But with high school recruits, it's such a crapshoot a lot of the time that I think, when somebody they give a ton of money to busts, people are going to look at that and go, I don't know if we want to do that.
I think the bigger takeaway here is that if you are a player like Nico Iamaleava and your primary interest is rooted in finances, then you need to pick a school with an alumnus that happens to be a vengeful spouse married to an absurdly wealthy person.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, you just be very speculative, or to be very specific about the kind of people who are.
It's no longer about how you fit with scheme or your teammates or program tradition. It is strictly about
how big is the cowboy hat that the oil baron who supports the football team that you're playing for. How big is that cowboy hat that he's wearing? How many gallons is it? If it's more than 10, you're probably good to go.
There were a lot of crazy wealthy Texan ladies that were in the Church of Johnny Football, and so that's why you need to go to Texas A&M and milk that cow for all it's worth.
Exactly right. That's right.
I could see Iamaleava go to Texas
A&M,
but they can't. He can't go to an SEC school.
Correct.
That's the other crazy thing about this is that in terms of limiting his landing spots, most of the schools
that's like half of college football.
Well, most of the schools that are going to be able to pay you this ridiculous number that you're trying to siphon out of Tennessee are in your conference.
Yeah. Well,
and you can't go to them because of the conference rule.
Yeah, and not only that, but okay, so you can't go to an SEC team. Okay, well then you can count on one hand all the other teams that might even consider paying you in that ballpark, right? Like that's the thing that it comes down to. You had a perfect situation in Tennessee, especially to the level of your ability. Why would you blow that up? So I think he got some terrible advice. I don't know who, people are talking about like his dad being, like behind the scenes. I don't know about that, but I'm just saying whoever's whispering in his ear has no idea what the hell they're doing, because this guy if he had just replicated that performance at Tennessee for another couple years, they would have loved him. They would have absolutely loved him. That would have been better. That would have been a better run for a Tennessee quarterback than they've seen since Peyton Manning. And he was like, no, I want to double my $2 million. And so that's stupid. That's really stupid.
They loved Hendon Hooker out there.
Yeah, that's right.
They
didn't
before he got hurt.
Who was the backup?
He was beloved.
Who was the backup Michigan guy that went down there for a hot second?
The guy that just got traded from the Patriots to the Cowboys. I'm forgetting what
was
his
that.
Donovan
Name was. Jackson? No, I can't.
No, he could throw the ball like a mile or whatever. Oh my God, this is gonna drive me nuts.
It's gonna drive me crazy
I need to
too.
find this.
He was terrible at Michigan, and then he went to Tennessee, and he was also terrible. But he had, he can throw the ball 80 yards, so that's all that really matters. But anyway, Nico Iamaleava, he will play college football at some point.
Joe Milton.
There we go. Jolton Joe Milton. Yeah. Nico will play at some point in 2025. He'll play for some team. I just think he's going to end up at a not great situation.
We've said all this, Lincoln Riley's going to give him his $4 million, and he's going to
which is actually the funnier option.
The team that originally recruited him.
That's a funnier option anyway, and I would be fine with that because I think he'll get rocked in the Big Ten. But we'll see what happens. So anyway, I just wanted to get into that and kind of talk about it a little bit. Next up, or in the next few weeks anyway, we have the NFL draft, so we'll definitely be talking about that as we get a little bit closer. But yeah, that's the Dubcast for this week. So until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.